Hey guys, and welcome back to World of Animals. A few months ago I set up this terrarium right next to me for my poison dart frogs. I actually never did a video on them, but I will do eventually. And my problem right now is that I'm not really happy with this terrarium. I don't really like the structure of it and the planting as well. So what I want to do today is a huge makeover of it. First I have to catch the frogs out, and later on I will rescape everything, really do a new structure. I will show every step in this video, and yeah, I hope you will enjoy it, so let's get just into it. I started out with removing a lot of the leaf litter in the front because it was in the way and I had to catch out the frogs at first. Then I went ahead and grabbed this film can because two of the frogs were inside of it, and I was really gentle with it, put a hand above it and put it in this small enclosure. This was just temporary for about 3 days I think, so it was no problem to keep them in here for a short while. Then I caught the last one of the frogs, and this is a juvenile. You might see it doesn't really look healthy. It's pretty blown up because she had an infection and sadly died a few days later. Then I went ahead and removed all of the structure in the terrarium and all the plants. This took a really long while because you might see there's a lot of stuff inside the enclosure. And I created a big mess while doing it, but this is how it looked. And one problem with it was all this dirt underneath the foam that I put into the terrarium. It was pretty smelly, and so it was about time to remove it. Then I prepared the walls of the terrarium with some hot glue after rinsing them to secure them onto the glass. Then I took some cork bark for the frogs to climb on and secured it with hot glue on the walls of the terrarium. This was what I came up with, and I think it turned out pretty good. After that, I boiled some expanded clay because I wanted to remove all of the bacteria that was eventually on it, and I distributed it in the whole terrarium because I used this as the drainage layer. All the water from the substrate now can drain into or in between the expanded clay and to the front of the terrarium, so nothing is soaked wet at any time and all the water can drain. On this I put this fabric. This is made for plants to create a layer between the drainage layer and the substrate for plants, and it is pretty useful for terrariums. I took the measurements of the insides of the terrarium, and after that I cut the fabric into an appropriate size. I put it in the tank and had to cut out some pieces where the cork bark was, and this did really work better than I thought it would, and the fabric would fit perfectly so no other substrate can fall in between the nooks and crannies of the expanded clay. Here I took a shot to show you that all the water can easily drain through the fabric, but nothing else can of course fall in between. The next step was to add some pine bark. This is the main substrate I use, and I distributed it in the whole enclosure very evenly to have a nice substrate for all the plants and stuff going in here. I also had to grab some pieces of the cork bark to secure some other pieces, because the glue didn't hold too good on the wet walls. But now everything is in place and really looking and holding good. The next step was to wet down everything in the enclosure really well. You want to do this before you continue, because you want your substrate to be moist and not too dry. Then I wanted to create some hides for the frogs, so I took some film cans, put some hot glue on it, and just put them into some container of substrate. And then I realized that I need more fine substrate, so I took the dust. And this method is new to me, but I think it worked pretty well, and in the end this was what I came up with. I think it looks pretty natural and creates a dark and not too artificial enclosure or hide for the frogs. I put them on the ground and up above, because these frogs do like to climb, and I wanted to give them the possibility to have a hide up above. Then I went ahead and grabbed some sphagnum moss, and I put it everywhere where I wanted to plant the plants. This moss can hold the moisture pretty well, so the roots of the plants always have some water, but I don't have to spray them like 5 times a day. I also created this hide out of a coconut, and I also put some sphagnum moss on top of it too. I had another piece of wood, but I didn't really knew where to put it, so I tried some different locations, and in the end I came up with just placing it on the left side to create even more structure for the frogs to climb on. The next step was to add the leaf litter. This is pretty important for frogs, because they can use the leaves for hides. The next step was to add some plants. Here I have some moss from the previous build, and I rinsed it off because one of the frogs was ill, but I think it's no problem to use it again. And I want the moss to completely cover the sphagnum moss in the future, so I place it onto it so the sphagnum moss can hold the moisture and the java moss can grow. After adding even more plants, this was what I eventually came up with. This is the final look of the enclosure. I think it turned out pretty good, and I have a lot of plants, but I ordered even more of them, so you will see them in the near future. The next step for me was to add some springtails. These micro-inhabitants are really important because they break down any leftovers and eat like everything that's organic and waste, so they prevent mold. Here you can see one of my frogs eating flies. She's really healthy, and as you might see, she has a gorgeous color. I love these frogs. The species is the Dendrobates auratus, and I have 2 of them. I hope male and female, so I may breed them in the future, but for now they had to establish to the new enclosure, but they did really well, and as you see, they're eating. And yeah, I hope you liked the video, and hopefully you learned something. Leave a like and a comment if you want to. We see us on the next one.